So I think you all know that what is the purpose of today's session, and it is written like it's written also here. That's a very subjective thing, I must say, that the moment it comes to, yes, like the session is how to approach history optional to cross 300 marks. And I think you all are targeting it. Yes, everybody is targeting it, right? And this is something which is not very, I must say, like non-achievable as such. 300 is a, like it's something that you should not think in this particular way that 300, matlab you have to cross 300. 300 is a mark, that you can say in this way that 300, I usually say plus minus 20. Okay? It may be plus minus 10 also. So basically when it comes to this, any optional paper that you are having, undoubtedly you have been targeting this marks. And in fact, I must tell you here that the moment you cross 250, the chances of your selection is definitely there. But the moment you reach somewhere around 300, then what happens? You are improving your rank. That's the utility of this optional paper or any optional paper. And in fact, what is the significance of the optional paper? That the, if you compare it with the general studies, in that case, you all must have noticed that the variation of marks is very less in general studies. Like everybody, if you have really compared the marks, and I believe that you all are serious for UPSC preparation, and you all must have like done this kind of homeworks like at your place, and you must have noticed that when it comes to GS marks, right? GS marks, this is somewhere around 400. Like if you'll talk about very good students, they are also scoring somewhere around 420. That's the highest score. And if you'll talk about a normal student who could not clear it, they are also getting somewhere less than 400. So in general studies, the variation is very less. And I'm talking about the serious students. Like there are some people, they're not prepared for the mains examination. They have been writing. I'm not talking about that because there are some people, they are clearing this just pre-examination, because they had been preparing for something else. They appeared in the UPSC pre and they cleared it. Of course, they were not ready for the mains. So here, when I'm saying 400, so this is a score for those students, those who are like really preparing for UPSC for last 1 year, they are reaching somewhere around 400. But when it comes to optional, the variation is too much. Like you must have seen, again, I'll say, that 200 marks people are also getting and 300 also being crossed by some of the students. Now when it comes to 300, even my students have also crossed 300. I think you must be knowing Asis, rank 53 or kuch aisa tha. Then it comes to Iswar Kandu. He also crossed 300. He reached to somehow managed to reach to 316. So it's something which can be really achieved, right? And it sounds also very lucrative because as I told you in the beginning that you all are targeting 300 and you should target 300, whether you are able to achieve it or not, that is very subjective, right? And that is depending on many factors. That's depending on many variables. But of course you should target 300, right? But the point is that how to target, how to approach history like in order to achieve 300. And how many of you are from history background? So, okay, good number of students are there from history background. So, do you guys, I believe that you guys have done history somewhere in your graduation or somewhere. So, you must be able to, must be feeling comfortable to score around 320, 330 if you have done your graduation. Are you confident or not?
No, sir.
Why?
So, the approach is different.
Approach is different. Very nice, right? So yes, even though if you have done your graduation, and in fact, I know what you people are doing in your graduation, right? I have been teaching in university for last 8 years, right? And that too in a very prestigious college. And I know that what exactly you have been doing. If you have done honors, then 4 questions. And if you have done BA Program, then 5 questions. Okay? This is what you have been doing. There are some who are not, those who are coming from non-history background. Of course, this is a new subject to them. And when I started teaching history optional for UPSC, I was very shocked because I always used to think in this way, those who have already studied history, and from whatever the colleges you have done your graduation with history, right? I believe that they have studied couple of books, and of course their comfort as compared to those who never had history as their subject, like must be more. I think this is quite like quite a general idea. So I was just thinking why these people are not able to score very good, and why the engineers or the doctors they are coming and just by reading the subject for just 1 year they are able to score very good. It's all about the approach, right? When you have done your graduation, you have been seeing at history in a very different way. And I have seen people struggling with that. What kind of struggle is there? Because they have written 4 questions in 3 hours, and you had this idea of elaborating everything, right? Here you have to write everything in a very crisp manner, okay? And you have to present maximum ideas related to the topic within those 200 words or 250 words. There you had been writing as much as you could write, and that's how the approach is very different. There is one more problem, because of for those who have studied history in your graduation, in their graduation, they are also facing problem. And what's that? Like, because these problem, these students have always focused on some larger issues of history, right? If you'll see history, and in fact this problem was there with this history optional, if you'll compare the questions coming before 2010 and the questions coming after 2010, then you'll be able to compare it, or you'll be able to somehow notice it, that there is a difference. Like earlier what happened, 60-marker questions were being asked even in UPSC also. And then further what happened, they changed the pattern and they started asking the 20 markers, 15 markers or 10 marker questions. When it comes to the questions of lesser marks, that had started focusing on the minor dimensions of history. And these dimensions, and these dimensions are always being ignored by you people. This is one basic problem that basic problem being faced by all those students, those who have done your graduation, right? So I must tell you that though you are having some idea, and I'm definitely telling you that whatever the information that you have collected while doing the graduation, that's definitely going to give you some support, some help, and you can really utilize those information while writing the answers in UPSC examination also. But at the same time, you have to change your approach, and that's why I have used this particular term, that how to approach. Now, moving to this point, how to approach history. That is a very important question, and that's why I would like to begin the course from here only, that how to approach history that you can really get 300. Now, again, I'll ask a simple question to you guys. What do you think the nature of the subject, first thing, and the nature of the questions in the UPSC examination are same or they are changing? If you'll see the trend in last 10 or 20 years, have they changed or they remain same? They have changed, right? So I think this you all must have noticed, that the nature of the questions are changing. And in fact, what do you think? The subject is changing or not? Or it remains same? There's a very common perception among the students that history, there is nothing which changes in history. ठीक है ना? History is changing. देखिए इनको पता है. And I think after 2014, it's changing in a faster manner. है ना? 3-4 साल और वेट करिए, फिर पता चलेगा पूरा ही बदल गया history. It's changing. Right? Undoubtedly it's changing. And why it's changing? There are a couple of reasons because of it's changing, right? And in fact, you must have noticed these kind of questions as per the new researches. These kind of questions you must have noticed in the paper also. So as the dimensions are changing in history, that's one thing. In fact, first of all, I'll tell you the approach to see the history is changing. Like what approach was there 20 years back, now the same approach is not being followed in history. And if you believe that you are not supposed to follow these kind of things, in that case, I think you should not target 300. You have to actually keep a track over the recent changes which are happening. And in history, recent does not mean that last year in the newspaper something came and that is becoming part of history. No, this is not what I'm saying. When I'm saying that it's changing in a broader period, right? So I think in last 10 years, there are some massive changes and bigger changes have taken place. And I think any person who had been following history or the subjects academically, only these people are able to keep a track over it. That's the beauty of, that's one dimension that you have to understand. Apart from this, there are new researches also going on. Well, broadly the history is changing, and within that, within that history, some of the new researches are also coming. This you all must be aware of, in Dhaulabira and then Rakhi Gadi, there are much excavations which are going on. And in these excavations, or through these excavations, the new ideas are also coming. And if you are not able to follow it, you have to follow it in a different way. In not that way, if something is happening in Dhaulabira, and let's say 6 months back, there was an article on Dhaulabira excavation, and they have just come up with a new conclusion or a new idea, and that idea should be included in your answer. No, this is not correct. Anything that has been published last 6 months or 1 year, that should not be included in your answer. But that should be used in a very smart way when you have been writing the answer, that without tempering the body part of your answer, you can include it in your conclusion, and that's how you can make your answer beautiful. So these are all techniques that you have to learn. Anyways, so I'll just come to that point, come to every point one by one. So when it comes to approach, so of course history has been changing, and in fact I'll prefer to say that even last 5 years also I have noticed that the nature of questions are drastically changing. The kind of questions which are being asked in, let's say, 10 years back, the same questions are not being asked anymore. So it has changed. So you have to keep a track over all those changes which are happening, and the moment you are able to realize that okay, these are the changes, I think that's going to really help you to understand the subject, right? Now the point is that if you really wish to excel in this particular subject, that what are the 3 things that you have to focus? There are simple 3 things that you have to keep in mind, and I'll just try to elaborate only these 3 points here just to make you comfortable in the subject, right? Of course, what is the purpose of reading the subject? Now I'm just coming to the basics of it. What is the purpose of reading the subject? That there are certain questions being asked in the examination, I have to write the answer of it, right? That this is the simplest thing in the optional. And any subject that you have been reading, this is the most simple thing that you have to understand. There are certain questions being asked, and you have to be ready for writing the answers of those questions. That's it. It's very simple. But the point is that how you are going to do it, right? Because as I told you, I tried to just problematize the thing, and now I'm trying to simplify it. So the first thing is content, right? Before coming to anything, the content is one of the basic requirement of the subject. Any subject that you have been reading, even if you have been reading the subject for general studies, you need to collect some content, right? The point is that from where to collect the content. Now this is a very problematic area, and in fact I'll just try to prove it by showing you some examples also. That if you are able to somehow keep a track over the changes, in that case you must have realized certain changes in the subject, specifically in the nature of the question, and these questions are not coming from the same old traditional ideas or the traditional topics. Earlier, the topics were very different. Now the topics are very different. And that's how when it comes to covering the content, that becomes a major challenge for you. Why it's a challenge? Do you really think that there are certain normal books that you all guys are reading? ठीक है? Ancient के लिए आप उपेंद्र सिंह पढ़ते हैं, ठीक है? Then for medieval you are reading Satish Chandra. Then for modern you are reading Shekhar Bandyopadhyay. And for world you are not reading anything, in fact. ठीक है? Whatever the books you have been reading, these are not up to the marks. ठीक है, आपको भी पता है, आप नॉर्मन लोवेक पढ़ते हैं, दूसरा जानन माथुर पढ़ते हैं, कुछ लोग एल मुखर्जी भी पढ़ते हैं, ठीक है, रंजन चक्रवर्ती. This is the only academic book, and in fact I remember couple of years back, nobody knew of Ranjan Chakravarti. Ranjan Chakravarti started reading just 5-6 years, from 5-6 years only. Otherwise, nobody knew about Ranjan Chakravarti also. Ralph and Burns, कितने लोगों ने देखी है? देखी है, मैं पढ़ी तो छोड़. Yes, okay. Those who have done the graduation, they must have heard at least of Ralph and Burns. ठीक है? Basically what happens in world section, you do not read a single standard book, at least those who are not coming from academics. Okay? But anyways, I'm not saying you have to read, then only you'll be able to score very good. I'll just try to prove something. So do you really think that just by reading these 4-5 books, your requirements are catered? आपको लगता है, कितने लोगों को ऐसा लगता है कि ये 4-5 किताबें पढ़ने से मेरा काम हो जाएगा? कोई भी नहीं बोल रहा यार, और मार्केट में तो ये रूमर है, 4 किताबें पढ़ लो, हिस्ट्री में 300 आ जाएगा, इसीलिए लोग क्लासेस नहीं आते. क्या करना है क्लास जाके? नहीं होता यार. Practically speaking, it doesn't happen. Reason? There are 2 things again I'll say here. Since you are under this perception that just by reading these 3-4 books, your requirements are going to be served, or your purpose is going to be served. But in that case, you haven't seen the question properly. That's why you have been thinking in this way. I do not think that a single book can cater all your requirements in UPSC examination with respect to this subject, because no question is being asked. Okay? No question is being asked by considering one particular book, because nowhere it is written that this particular book will be the textbook like your graduation. In fact, the pattern is being changed in the graduation itself. When you had been reading in the school, there was particular textbook, and then maybe you had been taking help from the other books, but the syllabus was very confined, and mostly you focus on those parts. But the moment you enter into graduation and you have started consulting various things, like you have done your graduation in different disciplines, that's a different thing. But whatever discipline you have done your graduation, you must have followed different books for different topics, right? I think the same pattern you should follow here also, because the content are from very diverse, or the questions are from very diverse topics. That's one thing. The second thing, the second major problem, because I have been evaluating the scripts for last 10 years and UPSC people, मतलब not in UPSC, टेस्ट सीरीज की बात कर रहा हूँ मैं, ऐसा मत सोचिएगा कि UPSC में evaluate करता हूँ, ठीक है. So what I have noticed that if any question is asked on, let's say, land revenue settlement, so you broadly perceive that this question is on land revenue settlement. You have been completely ignoring that this question is asking a specific dimension of land revenue and you need to answer that. And what do you think that okay, this question was about permanent settlement, I have written about permanent settlement, my job is over. Your job is not over till that period when the evaluator is coming to evaluate that script, and after evaluating script, like, he or she finds, okay, this is the answer which is cutting the requirement of it. So if you are not able to do it, in that case you can't target 300, and that's how if you are under this perception that just by reading one book you can really fulfill all these requirements, that is not going to be correct. Okay? And I'll show you some examples also. Then it comes to concept. That's very important, at least in paper 1 and even in paper 2 also, but in paper 1 it's very important. Okay? If you do not have a very good conceptual understanding of the subjects, just pick up the questions and you won't find that 50% of the questions are asked directly from any content as such. These questions are basically asked in such a way that if you are really having a good conceptual understanding, then only you'll be able to target these questions or answer these questions, otherwise it won't be possible. And what is the meaning of concept? That is again that can be also seen in a larger term. The first thing, I'll start from here only, the concept wala part, and I'll tell you that the moment you decide that you have to take history as an optional paper, how many of you, many of you must have tried to understand the subject by your own also. आप में से बहुत सारे लोगों ने कोशिश की होगी. How many of you really struggle with this question, what is history? प्रज्ञा इस एक दो लोग, आप दो लोगों ने स्ट्रगल किया कि समझने के लिए हिस्ट्री क्या है. अब आप बोलेंगे क्यों समझना है हिस्ट्री? व्हाट इज द पर्पस ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग दैट व्हाट इज हिस्ट्री? नाउ again I'll be asking you one question. Caste is a topic, for the sake of example, which you read in anthropology, which you read in political science, which you read in sociology, which you read in history, right? So the same topic, caste or varna, it's being studied by you in various subjects, in various disciplines. But do you really think that the same treatment is required in every discipline? So suppose if you have been writing any answer related to caste in sociology, the approach will be different. If you have been writing the answer related to sociology, related to caste in anthropology, the approach will be different. But you do not struggle with this question. And in fact, I have noticed even in my class itself, when I have been teaching about this particular thing, students are asking this question, sir, पहला topic कब शुरू होगा? ठीक है, ये होता है ना, आपको लगता है कि जल्दी से हम पहले टॉपिक पे घुस जाए, सोर्सेस. ठीक है, 2-3 दिन के अंदर सोर्सेस खत्म. ठीक है, मैं आज तक सोर्सेस खत्म नहीं कर पाया हूँ, बिकॉज इट्स सच ए वाइड टॉपिक दैट यू वोंट बी एबल टू फिनिश दिस टॉपिक और कवर दिस टॉपिक फुल्ली, बिकॉज it's having various dimensions. So try to understand my point. This is the first thing that you have to understand. What is this what is this subject all about? And the moment you have understood the nature of the subject or the the nature of this discipline, at least you'll be able to relate it with the topics which are given in your syllabus. That's very important thing. Whether you read in whatever forms you have been preparing this optional paper, that's completely subjective. But you try to understand what is history. And I'm not asking you to become very theoretical as such कि you have to reach E.H. Carr, आपको Collingwood पढ़ना है, आपको Gramsci पढ़ना है. नहीं पढ़ो यार, कुछ नहीं पढ़ो. You just try to understand what exactly this subject is. And when you have been reading the content, try to relate it with it, right? You must have heard these terms very frequently, the continuity and changes. I think all of you, because you all have taken history as a subject, history as an optional paper, so you must have heard these terms like continuity and changes. But I'm damn sure that you must not have tried to relate your answer ever with this idea of continuity and change. So if history means continuity and changes in a very layman terms, in that case, how many times you have really tried to relate this with this particular term, continuity and change? So the first thing when it comes to concept, try to understand this particular term, and for that you don't need to do the research कि मुझे कोई 6 महीने लगेंगे इसको समझने में. I think just for basic understanding you have to develop how did the discipline evolve. That's one thing. And the second thing, what are the recent trends in history? That's very important. And then it comes to the understanding or the concepts within the topics also. Like within the topics also, it's very important to understand the concepts, because you have seen, I'm just again giving you one example. Let's say you all know about the state formation. In which period did it happen? Early medieval period. Mahajanpada period. Later Vedic. Okay. और कोई? 4 आंसर तो आ गए. कुछ लोग ग्रेजुएट हैं भाई हिस्ट्री से, आप लोगों से तो आंसर एक्सपेक्ट कर रहा हूँ मैं. द प्रोसेस ऑफ स्टेट फॉर्मेशन, इन विच पर्टिकुलर पीरियड द प्रोसेस ऑफ स्टेट फॉर्मेशन टुक प्लेस? आप लोग बहुत प्रीस्टिजियस कॉलेज से आ रहे हैं, आप आपस में एक दूसरे को क्यों देख रही हैं? कब हुआ था स्टेट फॉर्मेशन? अरे कुछ लोग पढ़ के आए भाई, मुझे पता है ऐसा. बता दीजिए जो आता. यू आर हियर टू लर्न समथिंग. नो आइडिया. पहली सवाल में ढेर हो गया आपने तो. बहुत सिंपल क्वेश्चन पूछा है मैंने. स्टेट फॉर्मेशन कब होता है? लाइक प्रॉपर स्टेट. हाँ या प्लीज. लेटर वैदिक में. व्हाई डू यू फील दैट इन द स्टेट हैज अपीयर्ड इन द लेटर वैदिक पीरियड? किंग. वो तो अर्ली वैदिक में भी था. एक आदमी था जिसको राजन बोलते थे. Okay.
Sir, determined tentative were there. That is why we call.
अब आप लोग और सब्जेक्टिव कर रहे हैं इसका. अरे बहुत सिंपल से. आयरन एज. वेरी सिंपल. Economy developed. ठीक है. Look, very simple thing is there. The proper state formation could be noticed in the Mahajanpada period, right? Why Mahajanpada period? Because the proper kings are coming. Not even in the later Vedic period. Why not in the later Vedic period? That's considered to be a chiefdom society. सरदार होते थे, राजा नहीं होते थे. ठीक है. Because the moment you are talking about the king, the concept of land is very important. If land is not there, मन का राजा तो सब है. अपने बॉलीवुड के सारे हीरोज मन के राजा हैं. साउथ वाले ज़्यादा है. ठीक है. तो मन के राजा सभी है. That's not very important. The moment you are saying proper state system, there should be land, there should be a king, there should be army, and most importantly, there should be taxation system and there should be legitimacy, right? So the 5 dimensions are there. So how many of you have seen the rise of state with this particular perspective? And why did it happen? Like there is a very simple reason. Like you people are, let's say, choosing me as Raja. Why you people are choosing me as Raja? Because there must be some problems with you guys. ठीक है. And that's why it has been said that the conflict is the basic reason behind the rise of the state. That's it. Very simple. The moment you find certain conflicts, now conflicts may be of any kind. Conflicts may be class conflict. Conflicts may be social conflict, right? It may be of any kind, but the moment some tension is there in the society, you have been choosing somebody as the king or as the head, right? That's the basic reason behind it. And in fact, during the Mahajanpada period, both the factors were present. Why? Because the social conflict was there in form of Varna. Okay? And normally you believe that Varna evolved during the later Vedic period. But I must tell you, Varna was more influential during the Mahajanpada period. During the later Vedic period, it was just consolidating, but it was not consolidated, right? It was consolidated in the Mahajanpada period, and then since it was the second urbanization, right? So of course, some economic prosperities were there. And under this economic prosperity, what happened? The concept of rich and the concept of poor is coming. You must have heard about the Gahapati. That's one term that you can notice in the Mahajanpada period. Gahapatis or the Setis, they were representing the rich class. And in fact, in Buddhist sources, it is also written that there was like some people were falling in the Dalida Kula. There's a term used in Buddhism, right? Or Buddhist text. Dalida Kula means that these people were coming from very very downtrodden section actually. So that's how there is a clear concept of the class division in the society. So now the conflict is clearly noticeable. But you haven't seen the rise of state in this particular perspective. ऐसा कुछ नहीं कि मैं अपनी तरफ से बता रहा हूँ. There are various theories. R.S. Sharma, you can read R.S. Sharma, you can read Omela Thapar. They have tried to explain the rise of state in this way, but nobody tries to understand it in this way. So that's the reason, because of what there are two distinct kind of concept which is required. First, a basic nature of the subject or the discipline you should understand, and within that also you should understand the concepts. Okay, you all to talk about the Varna system, but nobody has ever tried to understand this Varna system, that how did it evolve. Okay. You know that in later Vedic period the Varna system came, but have you ever thought in this question, why did this Varna system come? That's a very important question. So I think you all should understand the subject in this particular manner, and in fact all these ideas are being ignored by you, and not even being ignored by you, but even the people, those who have been teaching, they are also ignoring these things. They are not focusing on these things. And see the questions coming in the ancient part. If you'll see the questions coming in the ancient part, they are so tricky questions, and you won't find the answer of these questions directly in any book, because if you have really developed the concept of the subject, in that case you can find the answer by or let's say from your concept itself, right? From your concept, you cannot find it from the the content directly from any book. And that's how the concept does play very important role. And in fact, you believe that medieval is very simple. Yes, true that there are majority of the questions in medieval, they are asked in a very simple manner, but the moment you are going to focus on some of the questions, they are medieval questions are also in a phase of transformation. And let me tell you, within 5 years, the nature of questions in the medieval are also going to change a lot. And then you'll say, then only you'll be able to realize, okay, now we have to understand the medieval with a different perspective. Right now, there are very simplistic questions are coming. So that's the reason, because of what you're not focusing much on medieval. And even the teachers are also, even me also, not taking medieval very seriously. ठीक है, उसको अगर एंशिएंट पढ़ाने में मुझे 40 दिन लगते हैं, तो medieval में शायद 25 दिन में खत्म कर देता हूँ. So that's the trend. But yes, I'm trying to cover even those parts also which are really serious and which are really very conceptual. So these are the things which are important, and you have to cover it in this way, right? And finally, it comes to the last thing, that is about the presentation, right? Of course, it is also very important. What do you know? Until and unless you are able to present it properly, that too in limited time and limited words as well, right? So if you're not able to present it properly, in that case, it's going to be tough for you. So this is the last part. Only once you have you got a good command over the content and then concept, then only it comes to the presentation. But that also develops gradually, and then only you have to then only you are learning how to write your content properly, that too in minimum number of words and minimum time. Now this you'll be learning gradually, but it definitely comes with the practice. But when it comes to the presentation part, there also again I must say it's directly related to content and the concept. Until and unless you are able to recognize that what is the basic demand or the requirement of the question, how come you are going to how come you are going to write the things which are really catering the requirement of the question? And that's how the moment you have understood this and this, of course you'll be able to understand the real demand of the question, and then you'll try to include those kind of things in your answer, and that's how your answer is going to be a perfect answer. So if you target 300, that's very easy to target 300. It's very easy to, let's say, think of achieving 300 marks, but for that you have to really work harder. If you think that if you are going for the simple one text and then you are able to score very good, that's not going to happen. So targeting is a different thing, and then really working for that is a different thing. So you have to work in this particular manner, right? Okay. Now, as I told you that if you'll see the questions, in that case there are certain categories of the questions that could be noticed. Let's say the first category I find understanding based questions, and in fact I have taken the examples for last 10 years only. I have just preferred the questions from last 10 years only. There are a couple of questions such as critically examine the various views regarding the Vedic-Harappan relationship in the light of the latest discoveries. This is what I had been telling you. 2017, this question has been asked of 15 marks. Latest discovery is one thing. And I think in no book, those who have done the graduation, maybe they have heard of this idea, but it's a very recent kind of, part of recent research when we have started discussing about the relationship between the Vedic and the Harappan people. Okay? आपने कभी इस डायमेंशन से सोचा भी है कि इन दोनों के बीच में रिलेशन है? आप सिर्फ इतना पढ़ते हैं, when you read about this decline of Harappan civilization, you read कि there is one theory given for the decline of Aryan invasion. So they invaded this part, they de-urbanized this particular community or this society, and they settled down here. but then this theory was rejected also on this ground that there is a gap of roughly around 400 to 500 years, and that's how this possibility is not there. So if the possibility is not there, how come this question has been asked, right? So there are different theories behind it, okay? And you have to understand what are the possibilities for this particular relation. But the point is that you have never tried to study, and in fact you read any book except the information that I provided, you won't find anything anywhere, because this is the only information that you have found in the book. Okay? That's one question. The Varna concept may always have been largely a theoretical model and never an actual description of the society. Comment in this context of ancient India. 2013 this question has been asked, and of 15 marks. Now this is what just now I had been discussing, that you do not have the proper understanding of the Varna system. आपको सिर्फ इतना पता होता है कि later Vedic period में Varna system आ गया, ठीक है? But the theoretical part of the Varna system is very different from the practical aspect of the Varna system, right? What was written in the text, nobody can claim that it was being executed in the society in the same manner, as who is going to claim it? And that's how the historians have given different views regarding it, कि how come Varna could be understood. And I believe that Varna is something which started from the later Vedic period, not I believe, but I believe on the basis of the historians that it started in the later Vedic period, but the consolidation of the Varna is a regular process. It continued throughout this history, and then over the period it got consolidated, and that's how there is a difference between these two. Now these are very purely concept based questions. Like you cannot find the answer of these kind of questions in any text. If you do not believe me, you can refer any book of these are a couple of books that you know. That's Upinder Singh, then Ranveer Chakravarti is there, then Romila Thapar is there, right? So R.S. Sarma is there. So you just try to find the answer of this. You can find for a couple of lines, but you won't find much about it. Next question, examine the relationship among economic growth, urbanization and state formation. This is what I was just trying to deal with right now. I told you state formation is something which is depending on various factors, and in fact, yes, if we'll try to understand it, it's related to economic growth, okay? It's related to urbanization also, because the moment we'll do IVC, we try to understand that what are the basic requirements for the urbanization, and the moment urbanization comes in, it actually looks for the state, okay? It actually looks for some sort of ruling authority, because that ruling authority does provide the necessities or does cater the necessities of the urbanization, and that's how state is coming. So this is also one theory, and that's how you can see. There were another theories also, like lineage theories there of Romila Thapar, वो हम बाद में कभी बात कर सकते हैं, ठीक है? Next, how did the Temple of South India as financial institution have deep impact over the social institution? Now this part you read in the text, but you do not read anything much about the social institution of early medieval period. So how come the temples were having impact over the society, or how come it was a social institution? Now this is something that you can understand only once you relate it with the early medieval changes, right? So until and unless you understand the early medieval changes, you won't be able to understand how exactly the things were happening here. So that you won't be able to understand, right? So this is for paper 1. Let's see certain questions from paper 2 also. After the Battle of Plassey, how did India transit from the medieval to modern age, right? Now this particular question, you find that it is related to Battle of Plassey. It has nothing to do with the Battle of Plassey. It has to do basically the concept of transition, the concept of entry of India into modernity. And it is such a concept that majority of the people, because if I ask this question here also, that what is the period when India entered into modernity, the answers will come in this manner. I know, and that's why I'm replying on behalf of you. 1707, with the death of Aurangzeb, India entered into modernity. That's one popular answer. Then somebody will say Battle of Plassey. Some will say like the social reformation movement. Some will say 1857. और आप में से कोई बहुत स्मार्ट होगा तो कहेगा 1885. ठीक है? क्यों? क्योंकि सतीश चंद्र बात करते हैं, सॉरी सुमित सरकार बात करते हैं इसके बारे में. With the formation of Congress, India entered into modernity. I think it's a very wrong way of seeing India's entry into modernity. ऐसा तो हुआ नहीं होगा, एक रात को सोए होंगे हम medieval में, अगले दिन हम उठे होंगे मॉडर्न में. पॉसिबिलिटी है क्या इसके? अगले दिन एक रात को हम पहली रात को हम पाजामा और कुर्ता पहन के सोए थे, अगले दिन सवेरे जीन्स और टी शर्ट में. ठीक है, possibility नहीं. It's a transition, right? So you have to present it like it's not necessary that you are like whatever the statement has been given, you are agreeing on that. Sometimes they are trapping you also. This question, I guess, is not here. Like once they ask, this question that most of the Harappan cities were found in the arid or semi-arid area. जनता परेशान, ठीक है, अरे ये कैसे लिखेंगे, ठीक है. So yes, this is true that they are found in arid and semi-arid area, but this does not mean कि when the Harappan civilization was flourishing, that at that time also it was arid or semi-arid, because it's impossible that if this area was really arid or semi-arid, in that case any urbanization must not have flourished there. That's the linkage, ठीक है. So you should have presented this idea in a very forcible manner कि this is wrong. There are some environmental changes because of what the environment or the ecology of this particular region changed later onwards, right? But it does not mean it was like this only. So this is how sometimes they are, trapping you. They are trying to trap you somewhere, but you have to be very clear in your concept, and that's how you can present your answer, right? Okay. Now, Tipu Sultan had little success in setting forth a course of change significantly different from the general experience of 18th century crisis of Indian politics and society, where public life tended over and over to become the system of plundering, right? Now, it is this question as asking you whether Tipu Sultan was different from rest of the people or not. Whether Tipu Sultan, or simplify kar deta, whether Tipu Sultan was a modern person or not, because this debate is there in history that whether Tipu Sultan really represented modernity in India or not, and this debate is there, and you have to understand what is the meaning of modernity and whether Tipu Sultan really represented modernity or not. And there are some very prominent historians, they have given their argument like Irfan Habib and all, वो कहते हैं नहीं था मॉडर्न वो, ठीक है, क्योंकि हम जीन्स पहन लेने से मॉडर्न नहीं हो जाते. टीपू सुल्तान ने भी कुछ ऐसी ही कोशिश की थी, लाइक ही डिड सो मेनी थिंग्स, बट वेदर ही रियली अंडरस्टूड, ही वाज टॉकिंग अबाउट लिबर्टी, राइट? He was talking about liberty. But if someone is talking about liberty, that does not mean that he is modern. Whether he understood the meaning of liberty or not, that's the most important thing. And Irfan Habib is giving his argument in this particular line. Anyways, I'm not discussing the answer. I'm just trying to tell you that only once your understandings are very clear, you'll be able to do it, right? Next, how did the English utilitarian thinking impact India in British rule? Now, this seems to be a very simple question, but I must tell you that until and unless you understand what is this utilitarian ideology, and you cannot talk only about one sort of thing. I think utilitarians had impact over various dimensions of the British administration and Indian system. It may be education, it may be the land revenue policies, it may be the administration in India and many other dimensions in what you are supposed to discuss. How far was the drain theory a focal point of the nationalist critique? Now, drain theory, it has been asked, and you believe that this question is about the drain theory. This question is not asking about the drain theory. This question is asking how come it was the focal point of the nationalist critique, whether it was the only idea on what the Indian nationalism, as per couple of authors, based, or it was different also. So this question is indicating towards something very different. In the initial stage when Indian nationalism was immature, just sprouting, it found expression in many liberal religious reform movements critically examined. Now, the nationalism, have you ever read somewhere the connection between social reformation movement and nationalism? There are connections, right? But you have to understand it in a different way. So there are several questions even in paper 1 and paper 2, which are related to basically concepts. So if your concepts are not very clear, you won't be able to answer these questions. अगर पूछते हैं आप किसी एक डायमेंशन को पकड़ के आंसर लिखेंगे, and that's definitely not going to be sufficient, right? The second question, the category of questions, is historiography based question. Now these days you all understand, अभी तो सभी लोग historiography की बात करते हैं, they all are talking about historiography, and I think हम जो चार्ल्स डार्विन का जो एवोल्यूशन थ्योरी है उसमें थोड़ा इवॉल्व कर गए हम, ठीक है. वी हैव स्टार्टेड टॉकिंग अबाउट हिस्टोरियोग्राफी, राइट? व्हेन हिस्टोरियोग्राफी बेस्ड क्वेश्चंस आर देयर यू कैन फाइंड the period of Indian history from 3rd century BC to 5th century CE was the period of innovation and interaction. How will you react? Now there was a period when it was also considered as dark age, right? Dark age तो सबने सुना होगा, शक्तिमान तो देखी होगी सबने, ठीक है. किलविस याद ही होगा. अच्छा, आप लोग दूसरे जनरेशन से, मेरे वाले जनरेशन से नहीं है, ठीक है. Okay, so dark age. So now what is this dark age? How do the historians assume it? How do the historians see it? I think this you have to understand, and then only you'll be able to understand what is this meaning of innovation and interaction. Whereas the moment you are saying dark age, it means that you have been discarding all possibilities of innovation and interaction, right? So it's basically based on historiography, the way historians are dealing with it. Do you agree with the popular view that the Mauryan established a unitary and the ये तो बहुत popular question, it's a debate. The economic measures of Alauddin Khilji. हाँ, this is a very important question from medieval. The economic measures of Alauddin Khilji were aimed at greater political control. Discuss, right? So now this is the question, and these questions are basically the historiographical debates, and you have to see it as per that, because no one sitting here is historian, including me. And since we are not historians, so we are not present the conclusion what we like to conclude. Normally we have seen that since it is being taught to you from the beginning that there should be some conclusion in history. I think, some conclusion in the answer. It's not necessary that in the same format is being followed in history optional also. In history optional, the things are very different, I must tell you, and that's how here you should see the things or see the content with respect to the historiography. That's a very important dimension. So there are some questions based on this. Okay. From paper 2 also you can find similar kind of question, such as the rise and the expansion of British Empire was the accident rather than the result of deliberate policy and design, right? The policy and design. Critically examine this statement, right? So of course it is a debate among the historians where they have been trying to understand whether it happened in this manner, and in fact there are a couple of ideas which are there. Absentee landlordism was a consequential feature of Bengal's permanent land settlement. That's also a question which is basically a debate, and there are several historians like Rajat Ray, Ratnalekha Ray, they have been trying to discuss about absentee landlordism and which class is coming to capture it. So this is how even in paper 2 also you can find this question. And yes, one question I would like to discuss about, discuss here, that's related to American Revolution, right? So the American Revolution was essentially an economic conflict between American capitalism and British mercantilism. How many of you have done American history? कितने लोगों ने पढ़ा है? जानन माथुर से? मतलब दूसरे सोर्सेज भी पढ़ा होगा? पढ़ा है? कहाँ से पढ़ा है? अच्छा, मेरी बुक से पढ़ा है, इंसल्ट कर रहा है? हाँ, कहाँ से पढ़ा है? सॉरी? अर्जुन देव से. और किसी ने? अर्जुन देव तो अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन के बारे में कुछ लिखता भी नहीं है यार. Anybody else done American Revolution? Normally what happened, you just see these kind of questions very simply, but I think it's a again historiographical debate. I think those who have done the course on American history of America, you must be knowing about different kind of historiography in America. Does anyone remember here that what is this historiography in America? Have you heard the schools like conservative, progressive school, neo left? सुना है? अच्छा, पढ़ा था बहुत पहले, ठीक है. तो ये सब सुना है. Problem क्या है? In world history, you do not read anything which is very substantial. But it does not mean that the things are very simple in world history. I won't say you to read everything with respect to historiography, but there are a couple of areas which should be read by you with respect to historiography, because that's helping you, right? So this is the second topic, right? Second important theme. There are certain questions, like this is a very important point for you, which are being asked, not certain questions. In fact, I'll say good number of questions being asked from the periphery of the syllabus. They are not being asked from the core of the subjects. And if you really wish to understand it, like you can compare the questions which were being asked 10 years back and the questions being asked these days. Discuss the water management and its conservation planning in the Harappan. Like this question was based only after the discovery started in Dhaulavira. Why? Because in Dhaulavira they found something very similar, and they asked this question on water conservation. Like किसी भी किताब में नहीं होता है. X is the statement that the philosophy of Shankaracharya revolutionized religious thoughts in India. 2019 they have asked this question. Now this is there in the syllabus, but the point is that like this question was not being it's not normally not being covered by you. So that's how we can say that there are many questions these days that are being asked from the periphery. In paper 2 you can find many such examples which are not from the core concepts, rather they are always being asked from the periphery, right? Such as the Christian missionary. I think what questions I remember in last 20-30 years, this is the only question has been asked on Christian missionary. Then Arya Samaj, but that to a different aspect. The Arya Samaj may quite logically to be pronounced as the outcome of the conditions imported into India from the West. So it's asking about Arya Samaj, but a very different aspect of Arya Samaj. So you might have heard of Arya Samaj, right? Sri Narayan Guru, right? Okay, this question was asked in 2017, and it's basically with the subaltern perspective this question has been asked. So now this is something which is related to basically the changing historiography in the last couple of years. The Arya Samaj may quite logically be pronounced as the outcome. Okay, this is the repeated question. Okay, okay, so this is how you can find the questions are being asked from the periphery also. So now they are not asking the core concepts, and this is what I had been telling you, that when there were some 60 market questions were being asked, they had some limited topics to touch. Right now 10 market questions are being asked, and that's how they do have the wide range of topics to be asked, and that's how the peripheries have become more important as compared to the main let's say main topic. मुझे अगर मैं बोलूँ आपको, so in last 10 years only twice they have asked question on गांधी. ठीक है, पिछले 10 साल में सिर्फ 2 क्वेश्चन उन लोगों ने गांधी के ऊपर पूछा है और पूछा ही नहीं. अब आप सोचिए कि मॉडर्न इंडिया पढ़ रहे हैं और गांधी को इग्नोर कर देंगे, हालांकि थोड़े दिन के बाद गायब भी हो जाएंगे. ठीक है, लेकिन हाउ कम इट इज़ पॉसिबल फॉर यू टू इग्नोर गांधी? That's how the trend is going on. But it's Gandhi is not being ignored only after 2014. Gandhi is being ignored only after 1919, I must say. 1990 के बाद से जो है, like there is subaltern historiography which is coming, and this history was not focusing much on these kind of things. Rather, it started focusing on something very different. So, anyways, so there are these kind of questions are very frequently coming. So you have to understand all these broader patterns. There are certain questions which are simply content-based question. ठीक है, ये कोई भी लिख सकता है और आप लोग भी लिखते हैं. But even in these kind of questions also, your presentation may be very different, and by changing your presentation, you can really score good in paper 2 also, paper 1 and paper 2 both. So there also you have to link with certain concepts, because this is not the pre-examination, this is something very different, right? So you have to here also include some sort of concept, and by including the concept you can really write the answer, and that answer will be really good answer. So basically, when it comes to the target of 300, as I told you that it is quite easy for us to target 300, but the moment it comes to basically working for that, so you have to make a proper strategy for that, right? You can't read a simple book, okay, and you can do it. Of course, you have to collect first the content from different sources which really caters your requirement. That's the first thing that I'll say you, okay? So don't depend on one book. Okay, I'm reading Upinder Singh, ancient is done. I'm reading Satish Chandra, medieval is done. If you are having this approach, in that case you are reaching somewhere around 230. That's it. ठीक है, मैं इतना बता रहा हूँ कि अगर आप एक बुक वाली अप्रोच फॉलो करते हैं, so you are reaching somewhere around 230, not more than that, not beyond that. थोड़ा और उसको enrich करते हैं, in that case you'll be reaching somewhere around 250. But if you really wish to score somewhere near 300, in that case you have to read, or you have to cover the syllabus as per, you have to cover the syllabus as per the content given in the syllabus, not in any particular book. What happens usually with us, that we try to cover the syllabus with respect to a particular book, nothing else we do, and that idea is not going to work a lot for you. So different topic from different books, that idea may work perfectly for you. Then the concept, of course, while reading, don't only read, try to think also, right? There is connections of everything. Okay, abhi I'm not explaining those things very a lot, where I do talk about that horizontal study and the vertical study. All these ideas are there. Because the paper 1, the approach that you have been following in paper 1 is very different from paper 2, I must tell you. If you have been applying the same approach in paper 2, what you have applied in paper 1, in that case your result won't be very good, right? In paper 1, approach should be different, you'll be scoring very good. In paper 2, if you're keeping your approach different, you'll be scoring very good, I'm telling you. So you can't follow the same approach. And these kind of understanding you have to develop when you have been writing it. So that's the place where I always apply this formula of vertical study and the horizontal studies, right? So when it comes to vertical studies, that that is applied in paper 1, where you basically cover a history of 4,000, 5,000 years, and that cannot be covered the way you cover paper 2. Whereas in paper 2 you have been covering the history of 400 years, in paper 1 you have been covering the history of 4,000 years. So the approach has to be naturally different. In paper 1, the sources are very important, and that's why you can see that how many questions are related to the sources directly, and the questions which are not even related to the sources directly, I think even in those questions also you should refer the sources, because without referring the sources you are not able to justify whatever you have been writing. So the justification of your statement is very much required. If you are not able to justify your statement, in that case you cannot expect very good marks. Okay? Whether in paper 2 the things are very different. As I told you, horizontal study. So what does it mean? So basically you have to learn how the connections are there between two different events. Okay. How come the American Revolution is connected to, American Civil War is connected to the Deccan riots, and so on, right? There were many such connections you can find within India, outside of India also. So that's why I used this term, horizontal studies. So the approach should be very different in paper 1 and paper 2, and I think if you have been following this approach properly, then you can really think of excelling the marks. Normally there is a trend in among the students, those who have been writing UPSC with this subject, you can score very good in paper 2, you can't score very good in paper 1, because people are not able to score very good in paper 1. Well, I think it's incorrect. My students have scored more than 160. In fact, Ishwar Kandu had scored, I guess, 167. I exactly don't remember, but his score was something like that. So you can excel to that level also if your approach is correct, right? And then third, it comes to the presentation, right? So when it comes to presentation, that gradually develops, and the moment you have really understood the requirements of the subject, it's easy for you to present whatever they have been looking for. And that's why I told you in the beginning, the answer writing does not mean that the moment you have written your answer on the paper, your job is over. Write the answer in such a way which make the evaluator very convenient, okay? And if you have been making the things very convenient for him or her, in that case the result is also coming in your favor. So these are a couple of things that you have to keep in mind, and if you are really able to follow it properly, I think it's very easy to reach somewhere near 300, okay? It may be 300 plus 10, okay? 300 minus 10 also. बाकी तो माया है सब, marks में क्या रखा है कुछ नहीं, ठीक है, सब माया है. That's all from my side. If you have any question, you can go ahead, you can ask to me. कुछ है, कुछ सोच के आओगे, पेपर वेपर पे लिख के आए होंगे कि ये सवाल पूछना है आज. I'm welcome. You are welcome to ask questions. Anything which is there in your mind, any doubt which is there in your mind. Yes, go ahead. From the book itself?
No, is there any book, just like the first topic, first chapter of Upinda Singh, dedicated totally for sources?
Yes, there are certain books, such as there is a book of E. Sridharan. Okay. In that particular book, you can find some of the medieval sources. There is no as such proper compilation of the sources on medieval, but you have to collect it from different sources. That is the only book I remember where a couple of books of medieval era has been given what is the positive parts, what are the negative things. They are not writing, this book is not writing much on the information being provided by those books. It's more critical analysis of the sources of the medieval era. Okay. But you can consult that book.
Sir, along with class notes, we have to depend on multiple books also.
Sorry?
Sir, class notes के साथ multiple books में भी depend करना
नहीं तो क्लास करने का फिर फायदा क्या है? क्लास नहीं, it's not required. You can rely on it.
सर मैथ के लिए
मैप तो माया है यार, उसमें कुछ नहीं रखा हुआ है. मैप के लिए it's all about practice. Don't bother about map right now. अभी इतना फोकस करने की जरूरत नहीं. I think it's an affair of just 3 months or 4 months. So when you are writing the mains, I think that was the best period to go for the maps. Okay? You have to just understand or make your content very much ready, and if your content is ready, within 2 or 3 months it could be prepared. So don't bother a lot about the map. Okay? Map is very important. I'm not saying to ignore you. I'm not saying you to ignore the map section, as out of 50 you are able to get somewhere around 40, 45 also. So you can't ignore it. But it does not require much time. It's all about practice, regular practice. If you want to do it right now, so do it right now, and then in meanwhile you keep on revising it. That's it. Otherwise you'll forget. वो obvious है, भूल जाएंगे. तो वो practice. It's all about practice, and it's all about also understanding the real content for the sites. Normally, I have noticed that students are focusing on identifying the sites. उनके लिए सबसे बड़ा Herculean task है कि identify कर लेना है कैसे ही. Identify कर लिया उसके लिए 0.5 marks है. And then for the description you are getting 2 marks. You have to focus on the description of the sites also. क्या करेंगे 0.5 लेके? The description, there are a couple of requirements in the description also, and I have seen most of the books are just giving either so many information or this much information. You have to have 4 or 5 very important information. That's it. Anything else?
So the syllabus is very lengthy. And how do we just cope with that?
I do not find the syllabus is very lengthy, right? Syllabus seems to be lengthy for this reason. They have written everything in the syllabus itself.
It's elaborative.
It's elaborated, right?
Expanding form further.
Acha, like this syllabus could be written in this way also. The history of ancient India, history of medieval India, history of modern, history of world, syllabus was over. Okay. But in what way they have given the syllabus? Let's say Mauryan Empire. So they are writing Arthashastra, then they are writing Indica, then they are writing Ashokan inscription also. So every topic that you need to cover, they have specified it there. That's it. So yes, even though it's bigger, it requires time. But it requires time only once you have been focusing much on the factual part of the subject. You try to understand the subject conceptually. By writing facts, if you are thinking of getting very good marks, you won't be able to cross even 220 also if you believe that history is all about facts. Nowhere you are expected to write only facts. The concepts should be supported some amount of facts. That's it. So if your approach is changed, if you have been following a different approach, the subject won't be that much vast the way you are thinking right now. तो सब्जेक्ट को देखने का थोड़ा नज़रिया बदल दीजिए. बहुत होता क्या है, आई एम टेलिंग you wrote the first means, you scored 200, then you thought कि content is less, दो नई किताबें ऐड कर ली, ठीक है. Next year you wrote the examination means, once again you reached to 220, right? So by doing these kind of things, you can only excel 10 or you can increase 10 to 20 marks. You try to focus much on the concept. If you have understood the concept, and there are many things, like let me give you one example. When it comes to urbanization, I only teach urbanization once when it comes to Harappan civilization. So in the Harappan civilization itself, I make everything very clear that how do you see urbanization, right? And whenever that next topic comes, like second urbanization or third urbanization, I follow the same model and I just tell ki, okay, the examples are changing, right? Let's say first urbanization, there was a different example, there were different examples. In the second urbanization, only the examples are changing, the model remains same. When it comes to state formation, or let's say when it comes to nature of state, just now I had been discussing about 4 or 5 important ideas about the state, and the moment you find the same thing, like you can apply the same idea. So it's all about understanding history with respect to certain models. For everything there are certain models. ठीक है, तो वो मॉडल से इधर दिमाग में अगर फिट है तो फिर आपको बहुत लेंदी नहीं लगेगा. वही मॉडल सोसाइटी को स्टडी करेंगे, 3-4 डायमेंशन से वो ध्यान रखने हैं. अब उसके एग्जाम्पल्स क्या लिखेंगे, आपको वो ले लेना है, उस फेज से ले लेना है, बस बात खत्म हो गई. तो उस तरीके से पढ़िए हिस्ट्री को. डोंट रीड चैप्टर वाइज, ठीक है, ये 1 chapter ओवर, द सेकंड चैप्टर इज कमिंग. सो आई थिंक इफ यू हैव बीन रीडिंग इन दिस वे, देन इट विल बी रियली वास्ट फॉर यू. यस. Well, that's a very subjective question. What I believe, since I am also like associated with the academics, there is no history without historians. Okay, this is the reality. Okay, those who have done their graduation, they must be understanding it. अरे ना तो आप historian ना मैं historian हूँ, ठीक है. The point is that we cannot write history. So ultimately, whatever we have been writing, like that should be written with respect to the historians. But at the same time, there are certain limitations in history, right? So you have to keep in mind that also. And that's why I always prefer, I always say to the students that whenever the question is about debate, ठीक है, you have to mention the historians. If not historians, schools at least, ठीक है. If the question is very simple, avoid it. So it depends on the nature of questions. There are certain questions that could not be written without referring the historians, right? So it's not necessary that in every question you have been including it. And I think only in 30% questions are there as such where you need to include the historians. Otherwise you can avoid it, okay? But still, everything that you have been reading, it's with respect to the historians only. कुछ भी ऐसा नहीं है जो historians ने नहीं कहा है. Ultimately, it's their study, we read them.
So I heard that about 30 to 40% of the syllabus is like matching with the GS. So can you tell something on that?
I will say the 100% of the syllabus is the matching with GS. ठीक है. You read ancient India, you read medieval India, you read art and culture, you read modern India, you read world history also. Okay. You have been reading all the parts. Like you have been covering it to some limited extent, right? When you read the optional, of course the concept is coming more, and of course you have been elaborating everything. Earlier you were not reading ancient and medieval, the kind of questions coming in the pre-examination, now you are compelled to read the ancient and medieval Indian history. अब तो art and culture से questions ही नहीं आते यार, अब तो सिर्फ ancient है और medieval है. and they have started asking such deep questions from medieval India. I won't say that it's replica. I won't say that, but yes, because the nature is very different in general studies or medieval. ये सब जो है ऑप्शनल वाले र्यूमर फैला देते हैं कि यार हिस्ट्री में इतना परसेंट मैच कर जाता है. देयर आर डिफरेंट रिक्वायरमेंट्स इन ऑप्शनल. रिक्वायरमेंट्स आर वेरी डिफरेंट. इट्स मोर कंसेप्चुअल. The content that you have been writing, that's also very different. In GS, of course, if you have covered optional, GS is already covered, right? In history, you don't need anything, you don't require to read something new as such. उससे काम हो जाएगा. But ऐसा नहीं है कि overlapping है, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है. Approach बहुत अलग है दोनों का. Very different approach both the persons are having.
सर
Yes.
सर वो जब आंसर लिखते हैं, जो मेरा व्यू पॉइंट है, मतलब बहुत सारे हिस्टोरियन को पढ़ने के बाद जब आंसर लिखते हैं तो जर्नलिस्ट को जैसे कि मार्क्सिस्ट बहुत सारे ये है, तो अगर कहीं मार्क्सिस्ट अधिक हो गया या जर्नलिस्ट अधिक हो गया तो उससे कुछ इम्पैक्ट भी होता है.
बिल्कुल होता है. ठीक. You have to maintain the balance. Like no history is written only by the Marxist fellows. ठीक है. Every history are having the other dimensions also, and you should try to maintain the balance. ठीक है. So I think yes, it's giving a negative impact. So your inclination should not be there towards any particular historiography. You should be neutral, and your answer should be presented in this way that it is a neutral answer. You do not know that like the person who is evaluating the script from which particular school he is coming or she is coming, and that's why your answer should be very neutral.
क्योंकि सर बहुत सारे जो स्कॉलर जो बहुत ही अच्छे हैं वो मार्क्सिस्ट हैं, तो उसको पढ़ने के बाद थोड़ा सा वो इम्पैक्ट आ जाता है वो चीज़. और इस चीज़ का जो है ना वो जीएस में भी वो सारे पेपर है ना, उसमें वो लिखने के बाद वो उसका लगता है.
तभी मैंने कहा ना कि you cannot depend on one book to collect all the content, right? The moment you are depending on one book, your inclination will be there towards a particular school. That's going to happen. तो थोड़ा आइडियाज लेना पड़ता है अलग अलग सोर्सेस से.
But definitely, sir, medieval history is dominated by Aligarh Muslim University. Then how we find?
If you are reading Satish Chandra, in that case, definitely you will find that it is dominated by Aligarh Aligarh school. ठीक है. That's Marxist school only. All these Habibs and all. ठीक है. Satish Chandra himself belongs to this particular school. ठीक है. I think it's not correct that medieval history has been written only by them. Okay? There are counter perspectives also. And in medieval also there are only certain patches where there is a debate between different schools. There are only certain patches. Okay? So I think in medieval also you can maintain that balance. That's not a very big deal as such. There are many historians, those who have been writing with the other perspective also. Right?
Sir, how the content which we study in history optional is different from that of graduation level?
History is never different in any level. Okay? The approach is different. As I told you that in graduation level you have been just focusing on 4 questions. Okay? And when the 60 marker questions are being asked to you, so can you really frame the 60 marker question from the smaller dimension of the subject? No. Of course, the debates are being asked to you in the examination, and that's how you focus on that part. When you study how to say it, I'll say that when you do it in graduation, you just cover one topic, second topic, third topic, and so on, right? The gaps which were there in between, you need to fill while preparing for UPSC. Minor dimensions are also being asked. So you have to be ready for that dimension. And this is one of the biggest lacuna with the students, those who have done their graduation is the subject. They always fill this, they are not always able to fill this gap. तो वो problem, तो भरना पड़ेगा आपको. That's how the approach is very different. I think it's more about here concept, ठीक है? How the continuity or the change could be noticed from here to here. That's what it's very important here. That's how you have to cover it.
After covering this levels of history optional, will we be able to solve the questions of prelims, or will we have to read anything else?
Well, if you are reading from me, I cannot promise that after reading history optional, you will be able to solve all the questions. Okay? Now the point is that of course, there are the kind of questions coming in the pre-examination, you'll be having an advantage. This is what I can say. But it doesn't mean that you have to read something very different or something altogether different. The same content is there, whatever you have been reading. So you don't need to read anything separately for the pre-examination. That's sufficient for you. and in fact he'll be having an advantage also. But the kind of questions, conceptual questions, the kind of conceptual questions being asked, so of course he'll be able to solve it. You remember that question, Kulya Vapa, Drona Vapa, they have asked. Exactly, Avadana, Soka. So ये सब तो आप ऑप्शनल पढ़ते हैं तभी होता है आपसे, अदरवाइज कहाँ होता है सब. आपको दो क्वेश्चन या 3 क्वेश्चन का एडवांटेज मिलेगा. That happens.
In history and ancient and medieval, sources is very important.
Yes.
But in modern and world history, there is no sources. So how can we replicate with it?
I think it's very simple for you, na, that in paper 2 the sources are not very important for you, right? Okay. Fine. So, look, the modern things have happened very recently, okay? And you don't need to prove the historicity of the events, right? Matlab, when you say that in Harappan civilization, the Harappan civilization declined due to this reason, you have to prove it, okay? When you say that colonial rule got over on 1947, you don't need to prove it, okay? That's the difference between paper 1 and paper 2. So in paper 1, the historicity of the events themselves are very doubtful. Like you can say, you can ignore that it was not true, and that's how you need sources to prove it. It has happened. Mauryan Empire was existing. You have to prove it that Mauryan Empire was existing, right? In modern, you don't need to prove that India was colonized because it's known by everyone. Of course, even in paper 2 also the sources are being used, because again the historians are writing anything, it cannot be without sources. But since it is, nobody's asking this question that whether the colonial rule existed in India or not, and that's how we do not focus much on the sources wala part. But historians, if they are writing something, they are giving some evidence. We do not require that much. That's the difference.
So what about answer writing?
Well, answer writing is basically a process. Okay? As I told you that if you have understood the basic requirements of the subject, in that case you'll be able to write the answers also. You'll at least be able to understand what is the content that if I have been writing, in that case I'll be rewarded properly. And then next, like the other things are coming through the practice only. Yes, you had been asking something.
Sir, how to cover recent changes of history? Like these books like Upinder Singh and other materials.
2006 में लिखी गई थी, 2006. Yes, for that you have to cover some recent articles and all also.
From where you can get the articles.
अब ये तो बहुत अलग अलग सोर्सेज हैं यार इसके लिए. जे स्टोर है, ठीक है, अकेडमिया है, archive.org.in है. नहीं यार, हिस्ट्री में ऐसा नहीं होता है. नहीं, doesn't happen. Yes.
Sir, my question was same.
Very similar. You have to follow the recent books also. जैसे academics में क्या होता है? If I have been teaching any paper, let's say I have been teaching the history of modern India. So any book that has been published in last 6 months, I need to include that in my lecture. So we have to keep a track over those things. अभी recently अगर कोई book publish हुई है, and then it will be expected from me that I'll be reading that book and I'll incorporate the new dimension that the author has added in the class itself. So I think it's a process through which you have been learning these ideas. तो नई किताबें जो आती है उनके बारे में थोड़ा बहुत जानना पड़ता है. That's how. Yes.
During answer writing, should we totally rely on notes to write the answers of the questions?
As far as the content is created, yes. As far as the ideas are concerned, no. Content तो आप वहीं से लें.
Idea and concept.
Of course, concept is something, if you have really conceptualized the subject, in that case, if the questions are manipulated or they are twisted, ठीक है, you'll be able to write the answer. But the content is always same, ठीक है. ऐसा नहीं कि the content is being changed. The content is same, but in what way you are supposed to write that content, it is depending on your understanding only.
क्लास नोट्स के अलावा अपने नोट्स भी बना सकते हैं.
क्लास नोट्स में जो नोट्स बनेगा वही सफिशिएंट होंगे, ठीक है. देयर आर 2 डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ नोट्स, प्रिंटेड नोट्स, एंड आई ऑलवेज आफ्टर द क्लास आई यूज टू से फेक द प्रिंटेड नोट्स, ठीक है. उसके बाद फिर जो क्लास में जो तैयार किया है, दोज 4 बुकलेट्स, दैट विल बी सफिशिएंट. वो प्रिंटेड नोट्स भी किताब ही है ना. तो वो वाई द प्रिंटेड नोट्स आर रिक्वायर्ड, बिफोर कमिंग टू द क्लास यू हैव टू गो थ्रू वंस, ठीक है. आफ्टर द क्लास इट्स नॉट हैविंग मच वैलिडिटी. That's all. Somebody is asking from the online students, ठीक है, asking this question, what is the motive of UPSC behind optional subject? तो ये पहले तो UPSC से पूछना चाहिए, मुझसे नहीं पूछना चाहिए, ठीक है? But still I am answering this question. Like every stage of this examination is willing to know something from you. That's it, ठीक है? When it comes to pre, they want to eliminate the capable fellows. तो 15,000 capable लोगों को ले लेते हैं पहले वो, ठीक है? And then they try to see the analytical power of you, and that's how they go for the mains examination. I think optional is very important, and that's why even after so much demand, they could not remove this optional paper, because optional is the only area from there, like, you know, or from this part they try to understand whether you really have that concept of, like, you have the talent of analyzing the subject or not. This is the reason because of it being done. So it's just a method to find it out that whether you are analytical or not. So I guess we are done. So thank you all for joining the session. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.